everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the WIT podcast. Or if this is your first time here, welcome. You're very lucky because we've got a really special guest for you today that I know you're going to get a lot from and be inspired by. And we just decided we're going to jump right in. This has been, interestingly, a long time in the making, but also just booked like within 24 hours. So sometimes that's how things work around here, a little behind the scenes. You know, sometimes you're planned out, you have your entire podcast schedule planned out, and other times wonderful surprises and good kismet happens and you can get Sadie on your podcast last minute. So welcome to the Do It podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So I want everyone to know, if you're not already following, please give it a follow. This will also air on YouTube. So I'm going to pull this up just so people can see it. This is her profile on Instagram. It's She Persisted Podcast on Instagram. Give it a follow. I want you to be listening to her podcast after you listen to this episode of the podcast, but please give her a follow. And so that you have her tools and her resources available to you. I know you're going to want them. Okay. You're welcome. Of course. I was thinking about what we could chat about. Obviously, you know, the majority of our listeners are teen entrepreneurs or just teens in general. I know we do have some parents that tune in as well. And now that we're bringing on more adult guests, we're getting adults. So it's fun. It's interesting to see the demographic grow and change. But I know you have your own podcast and you go on podcasts. And I was just thinking, like, what does Sadie want to talk about? Like, what's been on your heart? I mean, what is something that you haven't had a chance to really chat about or that you've just been thinking about lately that you want to share? I mean, I'm putting you on the spot, listeners. She has no idea that I was doing this, but I just think, you know, sometimes when you're a guest on podcasts or you're running your own podcast, you can kind of get asked the same old questions. And I'd rather have a conversation that people haven't heard yet and learn about you in different ways.
Yeah, that's hard. I mean, we're 135 episodes into She Persisted and 30 plus interviews. So it feels like a lot has been discussed, like you mentioned. It's interesting. I feel like the more I'm doing these interviews, the more that I am talking about my mental health, the more I'm going back to those early days of treatment and having more appreciation and nuance for the shifts I was making or the insights I was having or how other people were supporting me on my journey. And it's like almost hindsight is 2020, and it takes that like emotional distance to be able to reflect there and have that appreciation. But I started She Persisted while I was still in treatment. I started it at the tail end of my 14 months at a therapeutic boarding school, which I'm sure we'll dive into all the context there. But yeah, I was fresh out of recovery. I was still in that space. And so even though a lot of what I share does come from that time in my life, I'm still finding more nuance and appreciation for all of those skills and what it takes to really get through those early days of recovery, because that's really when people are seeking out these resources and these conversations is when they're at rock bottom and when they're really struggling. They're looking for something to latch onto and some shift that they can make that will really have an impact. And so I'm hoping that kind of reflection and insight and trying to understand really what was going on there is helpful to listeners because they're in that same position.
When you look back on those early days and you think about the adults and friends that were around you, what do you wish they were saying to you?
That's so hard. I mean, the common thread throughout my entire mental health journey was a search for validation. I just wanted someone to constantly affirm that I was struggling and that they saw that, because my entire day was consumed with sadness and overwhelm and emotional exhaustion. And it felt like I'd been carrying that burden for years. And so for me, it was an all-consuming experience. So even though I'd have therapy sessions or conversations sprinkled in, we're like, wow, that's really tough, or I see you're not okay, it still was nowhere near the amount of suffering I was experiencing. And so there was always that need for, you don't get it. Like, this is so painful. You just want someone to say, like, I hear you. I see you. I get
Mhm.
that this is really hard. It's the same thing when you're sick. You want someone to be like, oh, that's so terrible. Let me get you some soup, or just sleep it off. Like, you really want someone to really go above and beyond. And so what's tough is that with mental health, you don't necessarily get that, because it's not like, okay, you're sick, you recover, you're good, you move on with your life.
Mhm.
It really is a day in and a day out struggle. And so I think a lot of recovery comes with being able to find that validation more internally, and being
Mm.
able to get that need met by doing either shifting behaviors in your life and being able to work on when those emotions and needs are arising, or being able to like really go through the thought process of,
Mhm.
this is okay and I'm feeling overwhelmed and this is exactly what emotion I'm experiencing right now, and it makes sense that I'm experiencing that emotion. And then that mindfulness of, okay, this emotion is valid, but it's not totally justified. So how can I be more effective with how I'm coping with this and save myself the emotional exhaustion long term? And all of those little conversations you can have with yourself, and that inner dialogue, rather than outsourcing it. A lot of it
Mhm.
has to be done internally. But when I was at my lowest points, anyone saying like, I see you're struggling, I can't even imagine what you're going through, I'm
Mhm.
here for you, was so incredibly helpful. I mean, our urge is always to problem solve. And if you're listening to this,
Mhm.
you've probably tried that before or heard that before, but that's the last thing people want, because of course they've tried everything they can imagine to get rid of this struggle, and it's not working. And so what you can really offer them is your relationship, and that validation, that support, that quality time. One of the best things that my friends and family members were able to give to me during that time period was almost an escape from what I was experiencing. It was like that trust that if I spend time with this person, I'll laugh or I'll have a good time, or I
Mhm.
know that I'll be treated just like a normal person and I'll live my normal life. It's not like I would go and hang out with a friend and it would be a therapy session. With when
Yeah.
you're struggling, it feels like that a lot of the time. You're like, I just want something different. And if you are that outlet for a friend, you're probably having a net positive on their mental health, because you are helping them build a community, you're having a healthy relationship, you're helping them accumulate positive experiences. There's so many benefits to being there as a positive support in someone's life. And that doesn't have to look like talking them through their struggles. It can truly be having a good time together, doing things that you enjoy, watching your favorite TV show, whatever it is. That can be a really amazing resource that we don't always think of.
Mhm. I would add to that. I felt like during some of those times for myself, when people would ask me, well, how can I help you? That was felt like such a
Like, I don't
burden.
know.
I,
Yeah.
I, that is not a helpful question. Everybody going to a person who is in need or is in grief and asking or saying like, I'm here for you. Just ask. I'm just going to let you
Yeah.
know no one's going to ask.
Yeah.
I mean,
They
maybe like
don't want to.
2% of
Yeah.
people will ask, but when you're in it, whatever it is, but you know what it is, personally, when you're in that space, you don't even know how to ask for help and everything feels like an extra burden on somebody and you're not even clear what you really need and it just feels like one more thing that you're going to fail at in terms of like what to ask for. So
Yeah.
it was always helpful to me when somebody just showed up or somebody said, I'm coming by at this time, or we're going to go grab dinner at this time. And of course, I could always opt out of it, but sometimes just taking the decision out of it or just telling me what was going to happen was really helpful. So if you're listening and you love somebody who's going through something, try to avoid, although well intentioned, the I'm here for you. Just let me know what you need or just ask. Don't hesitate to ask. Of course, that sounds very generous. It's just not for the person who's in it. Would you agree, Sadie?
100%. I think that there will always be the easy out, the cop out to say no, because spending time with people can be challenging, especially when you're struggling. If you are anxious or depressed, those emotions are telling you to withdraw, to avoid what is causing that emotion to come up. And so what's better for you will always be to jump into that relationship. And the easy option will always be to like pass or be like, oh my gosh, so nice of you to offer, but it's okay. I'm totally fine. I don't need this support. And so in almost every situation, spending time with a friend or family member and having that experience will be at least somewhat beneficial, even if it's
Mm,
a short-term distraction, unless it's an unhealthy relationship. But if you're going out of your way to try to support them, it's probably not. And so I think there are some fun ways to do that, whether it's texting and being like, okay, do you want to have dinner? Are we getting coffee or are we watching a show? I'm coming over regardless, but which one are we doing? And
I like
giving
that.
them that choice, but still being like, I'm here for you and I'm showing up for you and it's not up to you, it's happening. And so that can be really effective. And I would say one of the biggest things from when I was struggling, whenever family members or friends did that, internally, I had so much appreciation. It felt so validating. I was like, wow, they really get this and I feel seen. I wasn't at the point where I could voice that. I was just kind of like shut down, not expressing that at all. But there was a lot of appreciation. And it was definitely a positive experience to have people come into your circle and support you and be there in your corner to help you
Mhm.
navigate that challenge.
And I was just, when you talking about that, just makes me think about just recently. I knew a friend of mine was struggling, and I knew that she wasn't going to, come out and play. Like there wasn't. That's not what was going to happen. But we, as in my dog and myself, we got her this thing that we know that she likes, and then I had like a fake note written by my dog, like on it, that was like, we miss you, and like we can't wait till I can go for a walk with you again, or something like that. But there was no strings attached to it. It didn't say like, text me when you get this, or I didn't even text. All I texted was Brody, Brody left you something. And that's how I
Yeah.
did it. And I think that's also something that you can do, kind of like a no strings attached, showing up. And I didn't knock on the door, because that would be I think that's very stressful. When I've been in those situations, I feel a lot of pressure, and that doesn't feel good. And so it's just it's a dance, and no one's going to do it perfectly. But trying is, at least try to show up for people if you can tell, if you know that they're struggling, and try not to take it personally too, I would say. Because I've been on both sides of it. And I know that sometimes it can feel like people are ignoring you or avoiding you, or like, can't you just text me back? Like, how hard is that? But then I have so much empathy, because I've been on the other side of it, where it's like, yeah, the text was a lot of work if I had to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
One of the
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, one of the best ways to kind of check where stigma and our own emotional resistance is coming into play with mental health challenges is by comparing it to physical health. And
Mm,
it's the same thing. Like if someone was really sick with like the flu or they'd just gone through surgery, you would drop a meal off at their house, you would text them and not expect a response, you would try and help out. And so when we think about mental health, it's a similar situation. You can't be like, oh my gosh, why are they not texting me back and explaining exactly why they're not here? Like if someone was recovering from a physical health issue, you wouldn't be like, why is their number one priority not my text? Like it doesn't take that much energy. You'd be like,
mhm.
they're just trying to like get to the kitchen, eat some food, rest,
Yeah.
relax, recover. And so if we can kind of check literally every aspect of mental health in that way, it can be very, very effective to see where either our own emotional resistance is coming up or stigma in general. And it can be really effective. I think a lot about like my grandmother, she gave the best example when she was recovering from surgery. She had pancreatic cancer and recovered, but she was like, people would come by and drop off meals, and it was so nice of them, but they would put it in Tupperware. And it was the worst thing ever, because then I have to wash the Tupperware and return it to them with a note and go to their house and drop it off, because she's like such a kind, like
Yeah.
over the
Oh,
top, like
yeah.
has to like return the favor. She's like, and it's in a Tupperware. Do you know what that Tupperware means? Or people would drop by and like she'd be like, but then I have to offer them a drink, and they come inside and we make conversation for an hour. And it's really interesting to think about it from that perspective, when you're like, when you are struggling and recovering from something physically, those little elements like having to return the favor or go above and beyond to show your appreciation can be really exhausting. And the same thing is true for mental health.
Gosh, I love, that's such a great story. I mean, this is why I love learning and from people, is like, that's such a good takeaway. The Tupperware thing,
Yeah.
right? Like put it in a disposable container.
Yeah.
And then there's no kind of obligation for anything. That's just like the
100%.
gift. Oh, I love
Yeah,
that.
we like have to drop our expectations that
Mhm.
doing something for the other person will result in some kind of them reciprocating or responding or texting back in some sort of way, especially with mental health challenges. So much of supporting someone will seem one-sided, and
Mhm.
internally it will probably have such a big impact. But if they're really struggling, you're probably not going to get that perfect text back or that
Mhm.
amazingly articulated, "You are the biggest resource in my life right now, and I have so much appreciation for that." That's going to be really difficult for them to express. And so if we can kind of let go of those expectations and have that like self-validation that this is a really kind thing to do, and I hope people will do this for me when I'm struggling, and I don't have any expectations for them to respond in a certain way, that will serve the person a lot more effectively.
I know we just don't do a great job in the Western world around giving tools and tips for how to support people during grief or mental or physical challenges. Like we just
Yeah.
we just don't. And so we know everyone's kind of like bumbling around a little bit, but as much grace as you can show yourself and show others, I think is always a good way to do it. And I
Yeah.
really want to direct everyone to go listen to your podcast because I just feel like that is your niche, that is your expertise. And I feel like if you people want to dive deeper into that, into understanding it, then they need to go listen to your podcast. So I'm not going to have you repeat all those uh insights and tips and tools that you have on your podcast. I want to encourage everyone to go listen to that. And I want to switch gears a little bit because I want to focus on the entrepreneurship piece of your life and your podcast, because I think that would be also really inspiring for young people. But I wanted to lay that foundation of letting people know that what you are out there teaching and talking about is a lived experience. You're not
Yeah.
talking about something that you haven't gone through. And you are providing a really valuable resource to people on a successful podcast.
Thank
And
you.
so, yeah, of course. So because we have so many young entrepreneurs listening to this podcast and entrepreneurs that want to start, they want to start a podcast, let's, like I said, switch gears a little bit and talk and chat entrepreneurship. Let's talk
Mhm.
about where you are today versus where you were when you started the podcast in terms of like the business entrepreneur side of yourself. What what would you love to say to the Sadie of, almost 200 episodes ago?
Oh, so bad. Like ears were bleeding. No one was listening. Like it was just such a disaster. Like I'm so glad I started when I did. And I'm so grateful for that every day because so much of podcasting is having time on your side. It's just like investing. It's a lot more challenging to blow up overnight. And so when we look at these huge shows, it's shows that have been around at this point for like 6-10 years. And so time is really an element that you want to have on your side for so many reasons. The first is that there's a huge learning curve when it comes to podcasting. And I'm sure you've experienced this yourself, but it's not only like the technical side of things, but like, how does a microphone work? How do I get rid of background noise? Why is there this weird humming noise in the background of my audio? Like, if you're shooting a TikTok, you have a phone, you know how to film a video. Podcasting, there's this whole other like technological thing you have to master to even like get to recording. So that off the table first, that learning curve gets better with time. Another element is being able to carry a conversation, conduct an interview, structure a solo episode is really challenging. A lot of the times you're talking for like 20, 40 minutes, 60 minutes. That's a long time to either talk it yourself or have a conversation with someone where you are present and able to like add probably hopefully some intentional and insightful responses, ask questions that allow the guest to expand and provide insight into their story and unique perspectives. That's a huge learning curve. When I listened to the way that even I just spoke in my early episodes, it was so different. There's little things like saying all the time, which I still do from time to time. But when I first started, I remember restarting the episode like 60 different times because I would say every single sentence. Like, hi, so my name's Sadie, and I'm like, dang it, okay, start from the beginning, take it from the top. Like you don't realize how differently podcasters carry themselves in an episode versus everyday conversation. It's a different dynamic. And so there's that element of being able to structure an episode and structure an engaging episode. And then there's the whole promotion aspect, which is a whole other beast to tackle. And that we've gotten to the point in the podcasting industry where having a podcast is not uploading an audio file and letting it be. You're writing SEO optimized show notes. You are running a blog tied to your podcast on your website that you've made yourself. You're running 4 different social media accounts. You are video editing your entire episode. You're pulling clips to promote that episode. You've become a graphic designer to create graphics for your show art in every single Instagram post you do. You are a social media manager trying to stay on top of trends and create additional content on top of your episodes to promote and grow your show. You're sending an email newsletter. So we've gotten to the point where a podcast is not just a podcast. It really does cover every element of being a content creator. And I love that because it gives you so many marketable skills. And that's one of the biggest things I found from podcasting, that 2 years into having a show and not doing it every week, but doing it consistently, I had these very valuable skills, which was graphic design, even though my skills at the time were still a little bit questionable, social media management, and even just being tapped in enough to social media on a daily basis to see how trends were shifting, how creators were engaging with their audiences, and not just friends and family posting like, here's my update, here's my photo dump, but like actual creators trying to grow their own audiences. And then some other skills like being able to edit an episode, writing descriptions, choosing titles, pitch guests. Those were all skills I picked up along the way. And I was able to get an internship at Dear Media, one of their shows, which is a pretty big female-focused podcasting network. And so I started working on a show on that network called Recovering from Reality. And I started that junior year of high school and learned so much. The other thing about this is a lot of these will be paid internships or paid work, and you can market yourself to make more than minimum wage because you have a very valuable skill set that most people don't have. And especially the Gen Z approach, people are eating that up, especially older creators and podcasters and whatever it is. They're like, yes, please run my TikTok. Please tell me what to do differently because I'm struggling. And so there are so many marketable skills that you can have as a teen or as a young adult if you start doing this for yourself. And as you are creating content for yourself week after week, month after month, you're constantly getting better at these skills, whether it's video editing, pitching yourself, copywriting, video. I think I already said video editing, all of these different things that are really important and very marketable skills. So I did that internship for a couple of years. I ended up taking on a couple other accounts that her and her family had going on, and then continuing to expand that kind of social media management thing. And then this past year, in September, October, I started a digital marketing agency specifically targeted at podcasters. So now we have very specific offerings where we come in, we get your finished episode, we pull your clips, and we've identified this very interesting pain point that podcasters have, where it is a full-time job to run your podcast like I described. If you are really doing the most with your episodes, which a lot of creators, if they have the budget, can and should be, because really volume and more is more is the name of the game in social media right now. People are putting out content at an insane rate, and the people that are blowing up are the ones that are doing content creation on a daily basis or multiple times a day on multiple different platforms. We're not really seeing as many creators post like one Instagram graphic a week, go dark, and then they have like 30,000 followers. It's like they're day in and day out grinding, providing value. And the amazing thing about podcasts is that you have created that content. You're just not utilizing it on social media. You have a long form, value packed, mind blowing, insightful piece of content that already has an established audience. You know that it's resonating with people, and yet it's not seeing the light of day online beyond the audio. And so what we do is we work with podcasters to take their episodes, we pull most of the time like 7 different clips from that episode, and even if they just record the episode and they're done with it, they can have a daily presence on YouTube, Pinterest, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook, and provide that valuable content in a short form setting across those different platforms, keeping things branded across the board, very aligned with their values and the message that they're sending. And it's just such a missed opportunity for so many of these creators because, again, they're getting hundreds of thousands, millions of downloads. And they're also in the hustle of like, how do I keep up this quota of posting? And yet you have this long form content that you're not using. So it's a really interesting concept and idea. And again, I go back to I was only able to do this. I was only able to have the skills and see this kind of niche as having potential because I had my own show and because I taught myself how to do everything. It was only within the past year, almost to the date, that I brought on team members. And I was only able to bring on team members because I was able to market my skills to other shows. My podcast is not making money. Like, I have 130,000 downloads. I've done a couple of partnerships here and there, but like, it is not a source of income that would allow me to pay team members. But by marketing these skills to other shows and to other creators, I can have someone edit my episodes. I can have someone repost all my content, come up with additional ideas, and we can do that for a whole other host of podcasts and shows. And so all of that comes from me like truly starting at ground zero. I was recording on an iPod Touch. I was editing on the iMovie app, not the computer iMovie, on the app. It was atrocious. I had no understanding of SEO or how to title an episode. I was like, oh, I'll go the clickbait approach. So I titled an episode about depression. Mom said you were sick. What is that episode about? Like, tell me, you're scrolling through your podcast feed, which my podcast would not have come up on because I only had 14 listeners, which were all myself. But like, Mom said you were sick. Like, what? Like, what niche? No one would have any idea. But I was like, it's clickbaity. It's a pull quote. Like, it was shocking. Like, it was a
but isn't it funny
disaster.
how you can like laugh at the stuff when you
Yeah.
look back at it? I mean, this is a little bit different, but same in that I've been looking at past speeches that I've given because I've moved into like a new kind of tier of speaking and pulling from anyway. So it's caused me to go back to look at certain things. And one of the things that I had to go back and look at was my first TEDx talk. And this agency had wanted me to like pull like a clip from it. And they said, like, we've watched it, we love it, but what's the minute range that you want to pull from? And when oh my gosh, Sadie, when I started,
it's like blinders
like,
on, like
I
yeah.
was watching it. And I mean, hey, the thing's done well. It's almost got 80,000 views. It's like, it's nothing to like, for me to be ashamed of. It's just it was so many years ago. And when I hear myself and I literally was like, okay, Sarah, this is like so cringe because first of all, I would actually say different things today because I've just more learned experience and life experience. Yeah. And I can see how hard I'm kind of trying. That's how I see it a little bit. Like, I just feel like I'm trying to be like, on the TEDx stage type of thing. And so I'm sharing that. And you and I are both kind of like, even like our body language is kind of like, just
it's
like cringy and like your shoulders.
Body, like,
I know.
It's terrible. You're like, oh my gosh.
But I think it's really good to share with people because it's inevitable, friends. Whatever you start, you're going to I've been doing this work for over 13 years. Sadie's been running her podcast pretty consistently for over 2 years, which is a big deal. And you're going to look back and of course you're going to like have those moments because if you didn't, then you wouldn't be growing and you wouldn't be evolving. So the alternative would be, oh my gosh, I resemble the same person that I was, 9 years ago or 8 years ago on that stage. Like, I hope not. I hope that I, have more life experience and I'm more comfortable in my skin and my body and how I talk than I was back then. So I don't want that to be a reason that any of you, hesitate starting your thing or putting yourself out there. You will cringe at yourself online in things. It's totally normal. I cringe. I see things that I do. Like, I just did an interview recently and I like, didn't really like how much I looked at but guess what? You do it, or you throw a filter on it and you throw it up, like whatever. It's like, Sadie and I are proof
now
that
there's
like,
AI where you can fake that you're looking at the camera the whole time. So there's a solution for everything.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna be worried about
Gen Z touch.
like what the hell, is going on out there.
I think the biggest
Go ahead.
takeaway is like start your business, your podcast, your account, whatever it is, not with the goal of blowing up or immediately selling or reaching your ideal customer, but with the goal of getting better and building the skill set so that you can do that one day. Because
Mm,
unless you probably don't have an audience, maybe you do, in which case this is a whole other approach to this process. But if you're starting with no audience and a minimal skill set, you're going to have to learn somehow. And the best way that you can do that is by actually producing the episodes, filming the videos, creating the product, building the website, whatever it is. And there's so many other creators that have reflected this. Mr. Beast is like the most insane case study in YouTube growth and content creation. And he said multiple times, like your first 100 or 1,000 videos, no one's going to watch them, but you're getting better one video at a time. And I think
mm-hmm.
that's very true. And as you start doing it, you're going to be grateful that you didn't have that audience at the beginning, because you're going to have that like, wow, like I'm so glad that I didn't blow up for that terrible first episode, because everyone would be like, what is she talking about? This is not a good podcast. And instead getting really great and getting better week after week, and then being so proud of what you're sharing and doing, and being happy to share the content now and have that take off.
I mean, I think it's definitely important for those listening, those entrepreneurs out there, whether you want to start something, whether it's a podcast or business, whatever, to understand that it's never perfect. It's messy. I think
Yeah.
Sadie and I both enjoy the process and the building and the growth, both personally and professionally, that come from running our own things. And I know I did everything in the beginning with WIT for sure. Although no, I remember I hired somebody for like $20,000, if not more, to build my first website, which now you can
Yeah.
build your website like in a weekend if you want to.
We
Uh,
do that. We have that service. Email us.
yeah. I mean, but it's like, that is something that, there's so many things that I know how to do. Like I can edit our websites now if we need something done. Like it's really
Yeah.
freeing when you know how to do that. And now I get to teach the next generation of entrepreneurs how to do that. And
Yeah.
that's really cool to be like, I don't feel like, of course there's going to be new technology that I'm not aware of just because of my generation or my age difference. That's cool. The kids can teach me, like, whatever. I don't have to know all the things, and I outsource now. I outsource the podcast editing for listening, like the audio of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's sometimes you all get to the point where it's worth the cost to outsource that. So I do
Yeah.
outsource that, but I still I still upload the YouTube video and stuff like that. I still do that.
The video and audio can be edited at the same time. So either you can cut out the person or tell your editor to edit differently, because you should be able to do those simultaneously.
Well, he cuts out, we do a little bit different. We throw the unedited version on YouTube
Okay.
intentionally, and then we do an edited version for
Gotcha.
audio, like for if you're listening to it.
Gotcha.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, maybe that's something we should talk about offline. I don't know if I knew
Yeah.
how it all works, but it is cool to know that, to learn the skills. And what I think I'd love for people listening, watching, to take away is, you learn these skills, and while they didn't necessarily translate to making a living off of the podcast, it's your podcast, the skills that you have developed, you are now able to be for hire, because now people are, so you don't, I mean, friends, like, you don't know how it's all going to turn out. So don't get too rigid. If Sadie had said, this is only going to be a win for me if I land a big sponsor for my podcast, or two big sponsors for my podcast, she'd miss out on this win that you have. I mean, that's how I see it, Sadie.
100%. And I think especially with podcasting, I mean, I have always done the podcast not to reach a certain download benchmark. I mean, the first very many months, I was my only listener. Like no one was listening to this content. It's always been to share my story and to help other teens and make the resources I had access to more accessible, create the resource I wish I had, all of these things. And so it's never been about the download number. There always is this like foundational drive to produce this content that means that I can keep going and keep producing these episodes with no end in sight, because I'm not looking for that certain benchmark. And I mean, especially with podcasting, it's like a slow burn growth. Like some podcasts will blow up overnight. We've seen that. It does happen, but it's very rare. There are millions of podcasts in the podcasting space, and there are thousands of new ones being released every week. And there are certain ways to differentiate yourself. One of the easiest ones is consistency, because so many podcasts, I forget the exact statistic, drop off after like 3 episodes and never come back to it again. So if you can stay consistent for a couple of years, you already are like miles ahead of the competition. And so that being said, yeah, I mean, podcasting itself, if you're looking for like that quick way to blow up, to market your skills, to market your content, definitely choose a different niche. Let's go TikTok, let's go YouTube, like anything else.
Let's pivot.
Pivot. But if you really want to provide a lot of value, if you want to learn a lot of skills, if you enjoy these types of conversations, and yeah, it's a different niche, but it's an amazing niche, and people love listening to podcasts. They have cult followings. And so it's totally worth it in my book. But I totally want to reiterate what you just said, which is like, if you're getting into podcasts as a teen, we want to set the expectations correctly, which is like, this is like a month over month we're increasing downloads. It's not like, oh my God, my one TikTok blew up and got 1 million views. Like it's a different ball game.
Yeah. And I think, as always with business, it's getting clear on your why. Why are you doing it? I mean, for me, I thought it'd be, the reason I was inclined to launch a podcast was because at the core of who I am professionally, I want to put young people on platforms and in spaces and places that are usually reserved for adults. Like, that's my thing, is like,
yeah,
whatever I get to do as an entrepreneur, I think, how can I make that possible for a young entrepreneur? Because I don't think that age should have a factor in whether or not you get a spotlight on you or you get your voice heard. I mean, ideas matter, not age. So your ideas, your creativity, your contributions are important to me, no matter how old you are. And it felt like people would take me more seriously because of my age. Fine. Maybe not even my age, maybe just the things that I've done, my resume, but not necessarily take a teen seriously because they didn't have that resume yet, or they didn't have those years yet. So I thought, well, I'm kind of the perfect person to create a podcast that features teen entrepreneurs because of what I do. And then I can be their kind of first podcast, because you and I know sometimes it's landing that first podcast, that first piece of press, that first speaking engagement, that everybody needs that first thing to then get the next thing. So I thought, okay, I can do that. And then it's been really interesting. One of the things that I don't think I've ever talked about this publicly, but one of the things that I encountered that I was like, okay, I wasn't expecting that, was that we would get like all these people submitting applications to be on the show, just right. But they weren't, when I look at everybody applying to be on the show, it wasn't really matching to how many people were listening. And then it wasn't really matching to how people were sharing our episodes on their social media about it being an inspiring podcast. So then I was like, wait, so am I just like, are people just gonna like use us to get on?
Yeah.
And then like, wait, busy for a second. I think my sound just went weird.
Okay, now I think it's better. Yeah.
Okay. See, it happens. This will be unedited on YouTube, happening in real time. That was just like a funny thing that happened, because I was really like, oh my gosh, people like love our podcast. Like, they want to be on it. I keep getting all these emails. And then I would go look at downloads again. For a while, I didn't even know where to go find the downloads. I mean, truly, I was really just like, that's not what it was about. And then I'm like, this isn't matching.
It's interesting. Like, it's become such a PR check mark to have to go on certain podcasts and jump through the hoop. And I get all of these emails. I read all of them. Don't respond to all of them, but I read all of them with guest pitches, because some of them are really vague. You're like, you've never listened to the show. This person never listened to the show. I have a story for you.
Oh my God, I can't wait.
This week, I got an email from a treatment center in California.
Wait, is this the thing that you shared on your?
Yes.
Oh my God, you're getting ready with me. Oh my God, it's so good. You have to. I mean,
insane.
I heard it last. I was in my sauna bed last night, and I was listening to that. I was listening to your thing. I actually had to restart it because it's
crazy.
Okay, tell them
the story.
This is a bad pitch, everybody, but this is also a great story.
It was a fine pitch, a terrible program, and people.
And it's a
Yeah.
reminder, everybody, if you are launching a podcast and maybe you even are in that space where you're like, oh, maybe you're even thinking I'm desperate for guests. Like I need
Yeah.
people. Listen to what she's saying because you're never desperate. Never be
Yeah.
desperate. Okay, go tell them what happened.
I get this email and it's a pitch up there like we're a treatment program in California. We work with teens. We'd love to have our CEO and featured alumni come on your podcast. And they gave really vague talking points. One of the things about a good pitch is they will give you the most specific talking points to differentiate themselves as a guest. So if I was going on a podcast, I would maybe say, I went to intensive treatment at 14. I spent 14 months in intensive treatment. I can talk all about teen residential experiences, therapeutic boarding schools, the troubled teen industry. Like minimal people will have that same lived experience. Their talking points were like, let's talk coping skills, maybe like mental health in the community. And I was like, what community? Like what coping skills? Like, how am I supposed to write an interview to start like with those talking points? Immediately was a no, but I got curious and I was like, okay, like treatment program. If they have a marketing budget, it's probably a treatment program with a little bit of like a sketchy element. I Googled them. This treatment program has had 12 lawsuits against them. Like not even just like bad Google reviews, full lawsuits went to court. Their clinical director is currently serving 30 years in jail for child abuse. They were wrapped up in the Catholic priest abuse ring and all of those lawsuits. They paid out $30 million to former victims from this program. And most people like move on with their life and be like, oh, that's so sad. That's so terrible. Like, feel so bad for the kids there. Like, I'll just continue moving on with my life. I was like, no. Like, this marketing company has taken them on as a client, is being paid to promote this program, to drive more patients to their program. I was like, absolutely not. I'm not just going to delete this and move on. So I read this email and I'm like, I'm not sure if you realize who your client is and the background that they have and what the troubled teen industry is, but your client has abused hundreds of children and has paid out $30 million to former victims. Their clinical director is in jail. They allowed their students to be abused by priests, like all of these terrible, horrible things. And so it's a good note with pitches to always do your due diligence on your guests. You never, ever, ever are at the point where a guest is like above you and you have to take them on. Like, obviously, they have a way bigger budget. They have a way bigger impact. They've been around for 75 years. I'm just not going to give them a platform, even though I'm a baby 3-year-old podcast. Like, there's no way. And so it's a really interesting note about who you're choosing to collaborate with, but also the troubled teen industry is a terrible place. And if you ever Google program and there's any semblance of abuse or any kind of legal action, choose a different program because there is probably more that they've tried to bury at some point.
Tell me, I feel like there was, before I jump into this thing.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you told that story again here. I mean, like I said, I saw it on your Instagram yesterday, but I just was thinking about such a great reminder when you are getting pitched people and you can kind of start thinking like, oh, they're kind of a big deal. Like, I bet they would have so many people that would listen to me or whatever that can be, that's the ego. And the ego kind of gets like, this could be exciting. Still do your research because that you would lose faith in your listeners would lose faith in you if they found out that you were like promoting that brand, that company. The other thing that, though, I feel like you said something on the Instagram, on the gram, where you said something to look like a way to look up programs, like to vet them.
Yes.
Yeah. Tell them what that is.
So if you're a parent or teen who's ever considering mental health treatment, there are a lot of amazing evidence-based programs. The first one I always direct people to is the one I went to. It's called 3 East at McLean Hospital. There's also a ton of very unethical for-profit programs with a really long history of abuse. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. There are tens of thousands of kids in these programs every single year. The current news headline is Paris Hilton. She's come out talking about going to these programs.
Yeah.
The Catch Me Outside, how about that girl, went to one of these programs. She was sent there by Dr. Phil. So many people have been impacted by these. It's not a new thing. They've been around forever. But if you are ever looking at a program, there's a couple of things that you can do to immediately understand if it's in the troubled teen industry or not. One is to look up the name of the program and then troubled teen industry. very quickly, you'll find like all of the negative reviews and terrible experiences. The second is to add next to the program name, Breaking Code Silence. Breaking Code Silence is like the nonprofit that is doing all the work to get more congressional oversight to these programs, to have more regulations. And so survivors, when they're telling their stories about these programs, will say, I'm breaking code silence. And so anything there, all of the information will come up. And you also go to the Breaking Code Silence website, and they have cataloged every single news report, lawsuit, blog post that's been written about these programs, if there is a history there. And you can also, there's other things you can do to look at red flags if you can't explicitly find anything. But if communicating with your parents is a privilege, if you have to sign over 51% of your custody, if there's not an estimated length of stay time, if there's no psychologists on staff, if they can't direct you to a very specific study outlining what treatment they're using in your specific age demographic with your specific mental illness, not worth it. Don't do it. It's likely not going to have positive long-term results. And bringing it back to the physical health thing, you would never be like,
never.
I have a broken leg. I see this really terrible abusive review, and I know most people get a cast, but this might work. Like maybe I could try that. Like you would never do that. You'd be like, I'm getting a cast because that's how you get rid of a broken leg. Like that's what all the evidence shows. That's what all the research supports. You would be like, there's this new thing, and like this program says it might be helpful. So we have to check ourselves, especially in the treatment world, because these people are very good marketers and they know what they're doing. They know how to do it well. And especially for parents that are like, I just want to help my teen. I just want them to be okay. They're like in there with the sales pitch.
So vulnerable, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Wait, have you heard back from them after sending that?
No, I wish. I want them to
think?
reply. My best case scenario would be like for them to be like, the marketing team to be like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Like we've dropped them as a client. This is terrible. Like this is so against our values. That's not going to happen. They'll probably just ignore my email.
I wouldn't count on that, because money talks.
Exactly.
And if they've got a big push right now for some good media coverage, they're paying for that. They're paying for that. So, but it could be somebody in the company who receives that email that had a similar experience as yours.
Yeah.
And in the marketing company that says, wait a second, we don't want to align ourselves. And then they're the ones that speaks out, because sometimes it's the people that speak out, not that you would expect, but they're like, wait, I don't want to align myself with that. When I was younger, I dealt with something or whatever. So,
and you would never know unless you knew that very specific Google search. Most people would be like, oh, great, a treatment company that's been around for 75 years and has established themselves as a care provider. Please come on my podcast. Like their CEO wants to talk. They have alumni that want to, like, you would never know.
I'm just the advocacy that you're doing even behind the scenes for people is so important.
Thanks.
Gosh, I just looked at what time it was. I've been talking for almost an hour.
Crazy. Time flies.
I feel like this happens every time that we connect. Okay, let me think about how I want to wrap up for our listener and our audience. I do want to just speak to bring back the point that, like we talked about earlier in the podcast, that what you are doing is sharing a lived experience. You're not somebody who's talking about something that you don't know about. So I know we could have spent our podcast here episode on the topics that you talk about on your podcast, but it was really important to me that we let people know to go over there and listen to the podcast for that information. And that that in this episode, we got to tie in the conversation about entrepreneurship and being an entrepreneur and the things that you have accomplished and the struggles that you've had. And I love that our listener will feel some relativeness to the cringe moments that you and I both have had. But you can't get to 200 episodes or 300 episodes if you don't start with one. So you gotta it's okay to be embarrassed by the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth iteration of your product or your business. So thank you for being honest about that and inspiring them with your story. And I want to just think about the best way that we can, as a community, the Do It podcast community, support you. Like what's coming up for you? What are some things that we can do to show up for you and show our appreciation for the important work that you're doing.
I wish I was like one of the professional people that was like, these are my next projects. Like this is launching soon. But the name of the game right now has just been consistency. There's new episodes every week, posting daily on all of the different platforms and sharing content there, and really proud of that consistency because it takes work. It's not easy to continue to share content over and over again. And so that's kind of just been what's going on recently. I've been getting a lot of great feedback on the solo episodes and really just deep diving into listener questions and advice and educating on coping skills. And so I will probably start doing a lot more of those, which will be fun. But for now, yeah, you can find She Persisted on all of the podcast platforms. There's new episodes every week. And like you mentioned, the couple first iterations of your product, that's one of the best things about podcasts is like, never has anyone ever found a new show and been like, let me start at episode 1. Like, I know they've released 400. Let me go back to the very bottom and watch all of them. And so people are most likely going to click on your most recent episode or a big guest or something you posted on social media. So it's almost like a safe space to record these episodes, not worry about who's going to listen or what could happen if you don't say something perfectly, because you can take the time to build your audience and get better at sharing your story and hosting a podcast.
And also, friends, if you are on a podcast, the nice thing to do is to share those episodes.
Yes. Like, why would you not? Like, that's just appalling to me.
I mean, it's
free promo.
It's a very weird thing that we've seen too, where I'm like, well, I know that you wanted to be on the podcast and you're going to be using the podcast to get on other podcasts, but why aren't you sharing it and promoting it and doing that? So
100%.
So make sure to do that. And you can even like go back. Like I was even thinking in promotion of our podcast episode that I was going to bring up our episode that I did on yours, right? Like you can always, even if you did something a year ago, friends, on somebody else's podcast, bring it up.
Relevant today. We talked about being the CEO of your life. Everyone is always on a mission to be the CEO of their life. You can watch it on YouTube. You can listen on all the podcast platforms. I'm constantly trying to highlight old episodes, and I totally agree. It's very an odd thing that people don't share those episodes because they almost equivalent it to like an Instagram story tag. You're like, oh, thank you for the shout out. And it's like, no, they've had an hour-long interview with you, giving you a platform to talk about yourself. It's like just such a confusing situation. And so I totally agree with you. If you want to know every single episode I've ever been on, it's on my website. All the little show art are there. They look so cute together. There's a Spotify playlist. I always update it because it's really amazing and fun thing that people even want to have an hour-long conversation with you and take the time to
just like,
edit
share. Sadie, I'm having a real-time self-aware moment that I don't think on my website I have every episode of podcast that I've been on, and I don't know why. So I should just add that. I mean, I have like the speeches that I've given, like, and then I have TV interviews, but I don't think I have. And I've done so many podcasts. I don't think I thought this is like a real time, like, oh my God, like moment.
People don't think about it.
I didn't think about it, and so. Thank you, Sadie. That'll be adjusted
on the
within 24
list.
Hours. But by the time this episode comes out, which this YouTube version of this is going to come out tomorrow, and then the audio is going to come out, I think, next week. But by the time this gets out there, I will have updated the website because.
And I'll update my website. We'll both update for the podcast. So you'll see the little Do It logo on ShePersistedPodcast.com, and you can click and listen to the episode.
It's just so funny. I just love learning in real time. Yeah. So I want to keep you, but I'm not going to keep you because I just feel like I could just keep going on and talking to you because I love the work that you do. I'm a fan of yours. I admire you putting your story out there, but not staying stuck in your story. I hope that you know what I mean by that.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's evolved. Again, you listen to the first things and I'm like, this was such an uninspiring way to talk about depression. Like I'm depressed listening to this. So the story changes. It's the same original foundation, but it evolves and adapts. And I couldn't agree more that like the way that we gain insights from what we've gone through is constantly adapting and evolving. And especially if you're coming at it from like a business or content creation perspective, there's a never ending inspiration, a never ending content bank to pull from and provide insight from.
Can you tell everybody where they can find about the business that you're running now, where you're helping people?
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell them
So
that real quick.
You can go to waveformsocial.com and you can see all of our little services and clients. And then we post a ton of TikToks with all of these nitty gritty podcasting things. Like, how do you check if you're on the charts? How do you see how many people are actively subscribed? How do you make your Zoom videos look better? How do you have higher quality video recordings? All of these micro things that no one teaches you about podcasting, but are absolutely essential to not getting burnt out by creating a show. So tons of educational content there. And then our Instagram at Waveform Social. TikTok is also the same handle. It's pretty much like a living portfolio. We share tips on there as well. But especially if you're a podcaster, I try to share all these little micro insights I've had, because again, lots of it is like teaching yourself, and it's not a fun process.
And I want to get all the links for that, because I want to put those in the show notes. But I'm somebody who I'm pretty scrappy with the podcast. It's really like, oh my God, I'm just like laughing because like, this is not the good lighting for the podcast. Everybody, like, don't do this.
But podcast is an audio, so it's okay.
No, but we do YouTube video. It's just that I'm saying, it's just that I'm recording later in the day. Usually I'm recording during the day. So I feel like I'm the perfect candidate for Sadie's tips. So
there's so many. Get ready.
So I'll be ready for that. But friends, I still did it anyways, like knowing that I wasn't even in the best setup. I'm also not going to deprive my guest of being on YouTube, because we do know that our teens like watching. That's something that we have learned, that our teens like looking at the guests.
The number one way that people consume podcasts now is YouTube and video.
Yeah.
Which when you think about it, podcasting is an audio medium. So that just says so much about the way that we're consuming content and the importance of doing video as well, if you're having these conversations.
Yeah. So, I mean, everybody that's watching can see that Sadie is doing her setup correctly. So everybody
except
can
for
see
my
that.
random ring light.
Okay. But it adds color, and it adds some texture, and I am doing it wrong. And so guess who has the company on doing it right? Not me. Go to Sadie. And you too. So this is actually an advertisement. She's not sponsoring this episode, but it's an advertisement for her company.
I love it. Oh my goodness.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I adore you. I will keep being a fangirl, and following you and amplifying your voice. To everybody listening, watching, please go give her a follow. Again, deep diving into tips and tricks and tools and all those things needed if you are needing some support with your mental health. Please listen to her episode. It's built for you. It's there for you. It's like having a best friend to listen to. And that, why not tune into that?
I love it. And you guys can listen to Sarah on the podcast. I'll really quickly Google what number it was, so I can give you
in real time.
in real time. This is going to be on the YouTube.
It's going to be on the YouTube, because we don't edit the YouTube, because I didn't want to edit everybody. What is it? Number
87. Just search She Persisted 87 or She Persisted Sarah Hernholm. You'll find the episode. It's great. I will share this episode and that episode when this comes out, because we share our episodes that we're on.
Yeah, we do. We know how to do that. And then who knows how we're going to collaborate again in the future. But my DMs are always open. My inbox is always open to you. And just congrats on the great work that you're doing. And thanks for coming on the pod.
Thanks for having me.